"Grandpa, breakfast is ready," said the young 19-year-old girl. Her name was Josefa, and she was an orphan. "Just a moment, my dear," replied Grandpa, adjusting the oil levels in various openings of the sewing machine. "There we go. This machine still has at least a year left in it," Grandpa commented, moving it to the center of the large folding table. "Oh, thank you, Grandpa," Josefa thanked him, hugging and kissing him on the cheek. "Now all the stitches will be perfect for sure," she exclaimed, running her hand along the sewing machine. "Well, let's go to the table. The fish soup will get cold," she said, heading to the kitchen. "Oh, maybe something will come out of this." Grandpa scratched his head, adjusted his shirt, and joined her at the table. The kitchen was filled with the aroma of freshly cooked pike soup. A salad of boiled eggs and cucumbers complemented the meal perfectly. Grandpa and his granddaughter started eating. "Oh, my dear, with your talents, you can go anywhere," Grandpa said, eating hearty fish soup. "Well, anywhere, really." "Some pepper?" Josefa asked, passing him the pepper. "Yes, please," Grandpa replied. In a matter of minutes, the plates were empty. Without having coffee, Josefa went to her room. She was eager to finish sewing the women's elongated shirt she had designed herself. She sat down at the sewing table and spread out the grass green shirt. Connecting the front and back pieces, she sewed a pair of side seams, then quickly attached the sleeves and moved on to the collar. The work flowed smoothly. Her hands eagerly manipulated the fabric, folding, stretching, and pressing the sewing machine pedal. "Wow, it's like magic!" Josefa exclaimed each time, marveling at how a new and interesting piece could be woven from the material that had been lying in the storage room for years. The fabric had come to her from her grandmother, and the neighbor gave her a sewing machine for a mere pittance. The neighbor had purchased a new and modern one for herself. When Josefa practically received this machine as a gift, she was over the moon. Josefa found some curtains in the cupboard and couldn't resist and sewed herself a blouse from them. Grandpa was truly surprised when he noticed a familiar embroidery on the blouse's sleeve, a piece his wife had done long ago to cover a burn mark from an iron. "Wait, I can't believe it," Grandpa said, carefully examining his granddaughter's creation. "Where did you get this fabric?" "It's Grandma's old curtain," he said, astonished, looking at Josefa. "Yes, you're right," Josefa admitted, thinking that this might upset Grandpa. "Well, Josefa, you've outdone yourself," he chuckled. "You're the genius." He laughed. "In any case, it looks lovely," he concluded. Then Grandpa went into the distant room. After rummaging around for about 20 minutes, he returned with a gray suitcase in his hands, a little lock dangling from its handle. "I completely forgot to tell you," he began. "Here's your dowry," Grandpa Leo pronounced. "Let's see what we have here," he said, using a small, almost toy-like key to open two locks. Josefa eagerly awaited to see what was inside. The suitcase lid swung open. Neatly folded fabrics of various colors lay before Josefa: green, blue, polka-dotted, floral, light, and heavy. "Wow!" Josefa exclaimed, going through one fabric after another. "This is amazing!" She rejoiced. "Grandpa, look how wonderful this is." Josefa picked up a blue fabric and held it against herself. The color complemented her complexion well. Instantly, various dress design ideas began to surface in her mind. "Unbelievable, Grandpa, thank you. Why didn't you show this to me earlier?" she asked. "There was no need," Grandpa Leo replied, and then, leaving his granddaughter alone with her dowry, he returned to his room. He approached the photograph on his dresser and traced his fingers over the image's face. It was his wife. Her beautiful hairstyle and noble smile indicated a life filled with love and joy, which couldn't be said about Josefa's parents, who perished in a plane crash. They had gone on vacation together, leaving little Josefa with her grandmother and grandfather. When everything happened, Leo's wife couldn't bear it and soon passed away. Thus, Leo and Josefa were left alone. Grandpa took care of the little girl, pouring all the love and tenderness into her upbringing that her parents should have given her. But Josefa became a restless child as she grew up. She was a mediocre student and didn't show much interest in anything. At first, she wanted to become a veterinarian, but seeing an unpleasant scene at a veterinarian's office once changed her mind. Grandpa didn't demand much from his granddaughter. He only wished for her happiness and for her to approach life and the world with wisdom. Josefa couldn't get into a university on a scholarship, so she went to college to study management. Oddly enough, Josefa graduated from college with honors. Grandpa Leo was overjoyed. However, it turned out that in real life, a manager was not the same as described in college, and moreover, established companies had no use for so-called managers off the street. This is how Josefa learned that in the real world, a manager was basically a salesperson, and she wasn't adept at selling. Working in a store required a kind of assertiveness and confidence that Josefa lacked. Josefa would have remained directionless if not for her neighbor, who altered her fate. The sewing machine intrigued Josefa greatly, and for good reason. Both her grandmother and mother were skilled seamstresses, and with the internet, one could access many sewing techniques and tricks. Josefa delved deep into learning pattern making, different stitching techniques, and various creative ideas. She became engrossed in sewing. She couldn't be torn away from it. At first, she often had to rip apart fabric pieces and redo her work. One day, Josefa proudly showed Grandpa Leo her latest blouse. "Well, how do you like it?" she asked, excitement in her eyes. "Well, not bad, it's nice," Grandpa Leo replied. From his expression, Josefa sensed that he was hiding something. "What's wrong? What's up?" she asked, approaching the mirror again and twirling around, examining herself from all angles. Not seeing anything weird, she turned back to her grandpa. "What?" she asked again, looking at her grandpa, who was struggling not to laugh. "What? Why are you laughing?" she asked her grandfather. "Oh, my dear, I can't. Why is one of your sleeves sewn inside out?" Grandpa laughed, no longer able to hold back. Josefa approached the mirror again, and this time she saw her mistake. "Yes, spending a lot of time on one task can lead to this result," Josefa admitted. "But you know, Grandpa, experimenting is trendy nowadays, so I decided to try it out," she replied, trying to maintain a composed expression. "Oh, well, in that case," Grandpa replied, still chuckling. However, with time, the young woman got used to not mixing up sides, front and back. Her skills improved, she stopped fearing the speed of the electric sewing machine's foot pedal, and she learned to make neat and beautiful stitches. Currently, Josefa sewed for herself and occasionally took orders from friends and acquaintances. Since she wasn't skilled at selling, she had to make do with small orders. "You could showcase your work on Instagram or other social media," her friend Christina suggested. Josefa pondered this. Christina walked over to the table and picked up the skirt that Josefa had sewn for her. "Wow! How did you manage this?" she asked, examining the fox-shaped patterns sewn into the fabric. "Sleight of hand and no trickery," Josefa jokingly replied. "You can't imagine, Christina, how lazy I am to spend time on social media," Josefa said with a touch of melancholy. "Josefa, I need to show off this skirt today," she urgently said, breaking into a wide smile, her eyes gleaming. Christina twirled by the mirror, turning this way and that. She smoothed the skirt, then adjusted it again. "I have an idea," she announced. "We're going to a cafe today," she said, admiring her reflection. "Christina, really?" "I need to finish sewing the curtains today," Josefa objected. "You know, Josefa, to work well, you first need to relax well," Christina retorted, and, heading home, she added, "See you at the waterfront at 4." And with that, Christina slammed the door shut. Josefa stood there in bewilderment. On one hand, she needed to finish her work. On the other hand, she hadn't gone anywhere in a whole month. She looked at herself in the mirror, seeing a charming young woman of average build. Her fair skin indicated she rarely saw the sun. Brown eyes, plump lips, and blonde hair made Josefa herself quite attractive. She twirled in front of the mirror, then pulled her hair up and pursed her lips. "Yes, I have a long way to go to reach Christina's confidence," she said. Then she retrieved a summery brown dress with white polka dots. She had sewn it during the winter but hadn't worn it yet. The dress accentuated Josefa's figure wonderfully. She had slightly fuller hips and sides, but that didn't make her any less attractive. On the contrary, her slight curves added to her charm. "Grandpa, I'll go for a little walk with Christina. My head is spinning from all the sewing," she said, peering into the living room. Grandpa Leo was reading scientific literature. He enjoyed delving into various theories and new perspectives on life. He put the book aside. "Well, all right then," Grandpa Leo responded. "Here, take some money with you," he said. "You might stop by a cafe or watch a movie," he suggested. At first, Josefa wanted to decline, as her grandpa had already done so much for her. But remembering the buttons she had bought for a new order, she agreed. "Thank you, Grandpa, you're so generous and kind," she said, approaching her grandpa and hugging his shoulders. "Well, that's enough clinging to me for now," Grandpa joked. Josefa beamed and disappeared behind the door. Passing through the courtyard, she headed towards the bus stop. Their house was situated in a gardening community next to the city. Around them were forests, fields, and clean, fresh air. Josefa loved this place. The bus arrived on schedule, and she hopped onto it. All the seats were taken, but in such situations, someone always ended up giving up their seat for her. She felt the stares of women and men, or rather, not at her, but at her outfits. During her bus ride, she subtly left business cards with her phone number. It didn't exactly work, but it gave her hope that people would learn about her. "There you are. Wow! What a style!" Christina exclaimed upon seeing Josefa in her new dress. "This polka dot pattern is amazing. You never showed it to me," her friend protested. "No, I did show you. You just don't remember," Josefa replied, simultaneously admiring her work on Christina. "Splendid. Well, shall we go, show off a bit?" Christina said, as if they were the most beautiful girls on earth. "Let's go," Josefa responded, squinting her eyes, playing along. Christina was one of those people who was always confident. They knew their worth and what they wanted in life, or at least, they made a good impression. Nonetheless, Josefa enjoyed being around her. She was lively, interesting, fearless, and always managed to make her laugh. "Oh, I'm so tired from work, I don't know where to put myself," Christina said as they walked through the city along the waterfront. "I get so tired of dealing with clients. Explain this to one, and redo that for another." "Oh," she exclaimed, expressing her weariness from work. "And yet, I want to be weak and vulnerable sometimes." She didn't finish her sentence. Ahead of them was a handsome young man with a small black case. Christina smiled at him and, adopting a puzzled expression, suddenly asked, "Would you help me?" She handed the guy a closed water bottle. "It turned out to be too hard to open," she said, lifting her left shoulder slightly. "With pleasure," the stranger replied, taking the bottle from her hand, unscrewing the cap, then handing it back to Christina. "Thank you, you've helped me so much," Christina babbled, throwing short glances at the guy. "Glad to help," he replied and continued on his way. Christina pursed her lips in disappointment. "What a man!" she exclaimed, watching him go. "Which man?" Josefa asked her, as if she didn't understand what Christina was talking about. "Never mind, let's go," Christina said, taking a few sips of refreshing water. The summer day was warm, even hot, and only the hat offered some protection from the sun. The wind played with the leaves of the trees, passers-by hurried somewhere, bought ice cream, and strolled with children. The fountain would rise, shooting streams of water high up, then fall, stopping for a few seconds. "It's really beautiful here, isn't it?" Josefa asked, enjoying their walk. She looked around and relished the simplicity of walking with a friend and chatting about nothing. Of course, when you spend most of your life in the forest, Everything seems beautiful, Christina replied, winking once again at a passing stranger. Listen, because of the fox on your skirt, everyone is looking at it, not at me. It's unfair, her friend protested. Maybe they're not looking at the fox, but at your lovely thighs? Josefa quipped. Christina was much slimmer than Josefa. Indeed, one could envy her figure. Christina pondered. Maybe, she said, and they walked on. After a 2-hour stroll, the girls were a bit tired. The sun had warmed too much. It was the perfect time to visit a cafe. They placed their orders, and Josefa went to the restroom. On her way back, she heard from behind. Miss, could you kindly bring the 8th order? Josefa turned around. A young man around 25 was sitting at a table. He was smiling charmingly and gesturing with his hands, trying to convey his request to Josefa. Yes, over there, he repeated, pointing at the bar counter. Josefa looked in that direction. Indeed, there was a tray of food there. She placed her hand over her chest and silently asked, Me? The guy nodded in response. Deciding that the guy needed help, she calmly approached the bar counter, picked up the tray with the order, and then brought it to the 8th table. Thank you very much, the stranger replied. Josefa furrowed her brows. But I'm not a waitress, she finally said, realizing that the guy had played a prank on her. I know, but thank you anyway, he replied as if nothing had happened. Josefa understood he had just taken advantage of her, so she couldn't hide her surprise. Are you acting a bit too audaciously? Josefa asked. Why? He said. It's just a small request, that's all, the stranger replied. Even more annoyed by his response, Josefa shifted her gaze from his blue eyes to the tray on which various treats were placed. Then I have a small request for you too, she said, putting on a smile. Oh, really? And what is it? He asked, putting a piece of meat in his mouth. He started chewing it with a look that suggested he was the king of the world. How about I borrow a bit of dessert from you? Josefa said, taking pastries with whipped cream from his tray. Hey! The guy exclaimed. Looking at your figure, I wouldn't make such a hasty choice, he smugly commented, and, dipping his meat in sauce again, he ate it. Indeed, Josefa replied, and with her other hand, she took a plate with a pile of fresh vegetable salad. Hey, wait! He protested indignantly, trying to stop her. But without turning around, Josefa returned to her table. So you've decided to watch your figure? Christina asked, seeing the plate of fresh vegetables. I've decided to watch those around me, Josefa replied, and then she proceeded to enjoy her juicy salad. The guy, who had just lost his order, sat at his table, irritated. He was surprised and, at the same time, impressed by how this bold girl had stood up to him. However, he couldn't allow anyone but himself to have the opportunity to respond to him so impudently. The guy was slightly nervous. Finally finding something to say, he approached their table. I apologize for interrupting your meal, he addressed the girl. Christina's face lit up with a divine light. She listened to him, wide-eyed. But I must say to you that this is my order, I paid for it, the guy said. Yes, I know, Josefa calmly replied, spearing the last slice of tomato with her fork. Christina watched the unfolding events attentively. The guy summoned a waiter. This young lady took my order, he complained to the cafe employee. The waiter was confused. Unsure of what to do, he requested the payment receipt. The guy began searching for the receipt. Not finding it, he started trying to explain to the waiter why he couldn't find it, while Josefa calmly handed the receipt to the waiter. Young man, please come up with another, smarter reason to get to know the girl, the cafe staff member responded and left. The guy stood there, mouth agape. However, seeing that everyone around him was looking at him, he adjusted his jacket and, bidding farewell, left the cafe. The girls continued their lunch calmly. What happened? Christina impatiently asked. You know, I really should go to the city more often, Josefa replied, starting with the pastries. The friends laughed. After the walk in the cafe, they went their separate ways home. Josefa returned to sewing. This activity calmed her down and gave her a sense of inner well-being. She enjoyed working with the fabric, how the sewing machine smoothly operated in her hands. Just a couple of years ago, they had serious disagreements, with the machine frequently jamming the bobbin or tangling the threads. And once, it even just stopped working altogether. Josefa had to coax it back to work, only to realize it wasn't plugged in. But that was all in the past. The girl stitched curtains, added ruffles. She was satisfied with the result. The phone rang. Josefa picked up the receiver, and a female voice said, "Josefa? Hello. This is Rosa Gallego calling. The thing is, I can't wait long for the curtains to be delivered. My nephew will come by to pick them up. Is that okay?" She asked, her voice friendly and energetic. "Yes, that's fine. They're ready, you can come by," Josefa answered. "Also, he would like to have a shirt sewn as well, or rather, it's my idea. I found a fabric that he'll surely like. He's a bit difficult sometimes, but I want him to have a memory from his aunt. Would you please take his measurements?" She politely requested. "Sure, we'll take care of everything, don't worry," Josefa replied, knowing that this kind woman always paid well and was always satisfied with the result. An hour later, there was a knock on the door. Josefa didn't expect such a quick arrival. She opened the door and then went to pack up the curtains. "You live quite far, don't you?" the nephew remarked. "I'm coming," Josefa shouted from the room. "Yes, it's far," she replied, entering the corridor where her nephew was waiting. Josefa looked up as she handed over the curtains and saw the person with whom she had literally argued yesterday. "Hello," the girl said. "Good day," the guy said, looking at Josefa with his cold blue eyes. Silence hung in the air. "So, you're the one who sews on demand?" he asked somewhat timidly. "Yes, it's me," Josefa answered, feeling extremely awkward. "Well then, my aunt asked you to take my measurements," the guy said. "Yes, of course, we'll do everything now," Josefa replied kindly. "Could you tell me your name?" she asked. "Malibio," he answered, then added, "Nice to meet you, Josefa," and he looked at the girl. "Likewise," she replied without any inflection. When the measurements were taken and recorded in the journal, Malibio was ready to head home. "Josefa, make him a good shirt, he's a good young man," Grandpa Leo said, extending his hand in greeting. Malibio was slightly taken aback. He didn't expect to see a gray-haired old man here. He shook the old man's hand in response and then headed home. From that day on, Malibio and Josefa began to have meetings, but they were purely business-oriented. Before this, only one man had come to Josefa as a customer, and that was an old friend of Grandpa Leo's. Josefa was concerned that due to the conflict at the cafe, Malibio might try to spite her, but she still hoped for his rationality. Malibio came from a well-off family. His father was a lawyer and held a high position, while his mother was the head of a bank. During his upbringing, Malibio lacked nothing and always got what he wanted. He was the only child in the family, so all the attention of both parents was directed towards him. Additionally, he had an aunt who doted on him. She had 2 daughters of her own. Therefore, Malibio was a beloved and indulgent child. If he wanted to attend a certain institution, no problem. If he had issues with teachers, no worries, they would transfer him to another school. If he wanted to start his own business, sure, here's some money. If he needed a car? No problem. Want to relax at a club? Absolutely. Son, you don't look well today. Go get a massage or hang out with your friends. Or, you haven't bought anything for yourself in the last month. Here's some money, go buy some clothes, his mother would say. Malibio lived carefree and comfortably, surrounded on all sides by love and care. Malibio's parents didn't rush him into marriage, thinking there was still time. When Malibio first appeared at Josefa's house, he was extremely surprised by their modest dwelling. A narrow corridor, a small kitchen, a living room, and 2 rooms that were almost 3 meters in size. That was the extent of their living space. How Josefa managed to fit a small sewing corner in there remained a mystery. After meeting Josefa, Melibeo was struck by her ability to find joy in such conditions. Yes, there was a forest nearby, clean air, but in his eyes, it all still looked quite humble. However, despite this, Melibeo wasn't planning to let go of Josefa's unacceptable behavior at the cafe. So, every time he came for a fitting of his shirt, he complained about the tightness in the shoulders, the width of the chest. Once, he genuinely got upset when he saw the buttons that would be on his shirt. "What is this?" Melibeo asked, arriving at Josefa's for the fitting. "Buttons for your shirt," Josefa answered, as always, with a calm tone that only further irritated Melibeo. "Do men's buttons really look like this?" Melibeo asked, his face twisted in puzzlement. "Well, how do you think they should look?" Josefa asked, realizing he was nitpicking. "How am I supposed to know how they should look? It's not my concern," he exclaimed, picking up one of the small white buttons and scrutinizing it intensely. "Well, does it look like a men's button to you?" Josefa asked sarcastically. At that moment, Grandpa Leo entered the room. "So, how's our young man, satisfied?" he asked, examining the shirt worn by the guy. Melibeo shifted his gaze between the stitches and Grandpa Leo and then, with a slight mumble, replied, "Yes, Leo, everything's good, everything suits me," Melibeo said, smiling as wide as possible. "Well, that's great, we've sorted out the buttons." "Ah!" Josefa quickly concluded, wanting to seal the customer's agreement in front of witnesses. Despite Leo being quite old, he commanded respect from Melibeo. If he could make jokes with Josefa, the moment he saw Leo, all his irritation vanished in an instant. The guy felt awkward next to him and even sensed some weakness in his character, which couldn't be said about the old man. Leo, with his closely cropped gray hair, tan skin, and always well-dressed appearance, demanded respect. His dark chestnut, almost black eyes, staring intently, evoked a sense of fear. "I can have your order delivered to the address tomorrow morning, and then we can say goodbye, Melibeo." His name sounded somewhat different when she said it. "Why bother sending it?" "I'll come pick it up myself," suddenly the customer said, looking at Josefa, and then, to conceal the real reason for his visit, he added, "You never know." "All right, whenever it's convenient for you." "Grandpa Leo, please see our guest off," his granddaughter requested with an angelic voice. He complied with her request. Melibeo was a bit bewildered by this unexpected turn of events and the conclusion of their joint project. It was as if he didn't want to part with the girl. The next day, it was Grandpa Leo who opened the door once again. "Good day, Leo. How are you doing?" Melibeo asked with a cheerful tone. Handing his hand to the young man, Grandpa Leo replied that everything was fine. "It's just that the sewing machine has started being temperamental again," the old man said, his wrinkles becoming more prominent from his smile, though his face remained equally kind and friendly. "Yes, technology, like a woman, requires attention," Melibeo added, waiting for Josefa to appear, but she still hadn't shown up. "You've obviously come for the shirt?" Grandpa asked. "Just a minute, I'll fetch it," he said, disappearing into the workshop. This slightly puzzled Melibeo, as he hoped to see Josefa. "Here you go," Leo said, handing the young man a box with his new shirt. "Thank you," Melibeo said slowly. He held the box in his hands, turning it as if trying to delay time, then finally asked, "Is Josefa home?" "Josefa?" Grandpa often referred to his granddaughter that way. "She went to the city to buy some threads from the sewing shop, and she mentioned some names. She said she'll be back by evening," Leo replied. Melibeo was a bit disappointed. He wanted to meet with the girl, but it didn't happen. After bidding farewell, he left. When he returned home, he felt a strange emotion he hadn't experienced before. A sense of melancholy settled in his chest. An unfamiliar desire to see this girl again crept into his mind. He never thought their meetings would end so quickly. The girl named Josefa was definitely unlike the women he was used to encountering in his life. Usually, ladies would try to initiate conversations with him, become his friends, attempt to impress him, and surround him with their attention and affection. But Josefa had something in her life that seemed to take precedence over all else. He understood this immediately, from the moment she started taking his measurements. Her gaze was soft yet focused. It was intriguing to watch her as she calculated measurements. In that moment, she was looking directly at him, yet she seemed to be somewhere else entirely. And when she grasped his wrist to take another measurement, Melibeo felt the warmth and tenderness of her touch. However, her grip was firm, and once she caught hold, she held on tight. Melibeo was sitting in the armchair. He did nothing but silently stare straight ahead. For the first time in his life, he pondered the extent of this girl's dedication to her life and how much she loved her work. This was something Melibeo had never experienced. He never took his pursuits seriously. Yet every time he started something, after a short while, his interest would wane, the purpose of his endeavor would fade away, be it in terms of business projects or other matters. He realized that Josefa was much stronger in this regard, or more precisely, that her self-belief and dedication to her work were much stronger than she probably imagined. Melibeo slowly rocked back and forth. In that moment, he realized a lot about himself and his life. At that moment, the door to his room swung open, and a dog named Giorgio leaped onto his lap from a running start. The hunting spaniel, upon seeing his beloved friend, began to enthusiastically lick his face. Out of reflex, Melibeo leaned back farther than he should have, causing the chair to lose balance, and he fell onto his back with the dog in his arms. Giorgio got worried for his friend and redoubled his efforts to lick Melibeo's face, attempting to bring him back to his senses. "Hey, Giorgio, no, stop that." Melibeo covered himself with his hands, trying to keep the dog at arm's length. "Oh, my Melibeo, what happened, son?" His mother appeared in the doorway. Melibeo looked at her upside-down figure. "Are you hurt?" she asked with concern. Struggling against the dog's overwhelming affection, Melibeo got to his feet. "No, Mom, I'm fine," he replied. The fall on the floor somewhat dispelled the melancholy that had enveloped him. "We're having a dinner on Friday. Important guests are coming. We need your presence," she said, coming closer to her son and patting his cheek. "I love you, son," she said, her eyes carrying an almost greedy expression, as if she wanted to receive her son's love in return, just in larger quantities. "All right, Mom." "I love you too," Melibeo replied, looking at his mother. This woman, whose name was Nora, was slim and beautiful. Young girls would envy her body, as she took special care of herself. Her fair skin added an extra layer of coldness to her appearance, her blue eyes, like two shards of ice, pierced through with their gaze, and only a faint smile on her face hinted at her good mood. Nora liked to wear elaborate hairstyles and always wore high heels. She frequently changed her wardrobe, constantly buying new outfits for herself. Nora looked at her son's clothes, her face slightly wrinkled. Then she took out cash from her mini purse and handed it to her son. "Buy yourself something. You can't wear the same clothes for too long. It can lead to depression," she said, then left his room. Following her, the spaniel left as well, its claws tapping on the parquet floor. Melibeo looked at his shirt, covered in dog hair. He took it off and threw it into the basket. Glancing at the box he brought back from the seamstress, he removed the lid. Inside there was a blue shirt, with a small piece of chocolate on top, carrying sweet life wishes. An involuntary smile touched his lips. "I think she likes me," the guy thought. Undressing completely, he headed for the shower. The day arrived when Melibeo's family was hosting guests. The chefs prepared amazing dishes, mushrooms and creamy sauce, tender meat cutlets, a variety of salads, and much more. Everyone was already seated at the table, with only Melibeo missing. Instead of going to the store, as his mother suggested, he went to see Josefa, who once again wasn't home. He even suspected that Leo had deliberately informed him of her absence. "And here's our son," Nora exclaimed as soon as he appeared in the living room. Bright lights illuminated the room, candles were lit, and a couple of splendid rose bouquets adorned the space. Nora approached her son, hugged him, and whispered in his ear, "This is the deputy's daughter. You should make a good impression on her. Got it?" She whispered, hardly moving her lips. Melibeo responded with a smile, then greeted the others. Taking a seat opposite the deputy's daughter, Melibeo began to serve himself food. Silence hung in the air. Noticing sidelong glances, Melibeo smiled again, then paid the girl a compliment. "Agata, you are truly charming." "I'm delighted to have dinner in the company of your family," Melibeo said. The girl's name was Agata. She seemed a bit older, or maybe she was just tired of behaving like a proper girl from an important and wealthy family. Her elongated face, long nose, and thin lips made her expression somewhat off-putting. She gave off a veneer-like impression. When she smiled, her thin, thread-like lips twisted into odd lines that resembled a horizontal comma. Her small, short teeth seemed to indicate not only her voracious appetite for food but also for everything else. Thank you," the girl replied with a noticeable lisp. Melibeo almost burst into laughter. He barely held back, stuffing a piece of roast duck into his mouth. Dinner commenced. Guests were serving themselves, and conversations began to flow. Melibeo observed the guests. Occasionally, when his gaze met Agata's eyes, she would immediately start flirting. During one of her smiles, Melibeo managed to spot a pickled cucumber sticking out from her cheek, which looked rather amusing. "Our daughter is like a diamond to us," her father was saying. "She's endlessly talented and very intelligent. Her imagination often astounds me," her father praised his daughter. "Yes, it's evident from her," Melibeo blurted out, causing a new wave of side-eye glances. I mean to say that a person's beauty is expressed in everything, in imagination, intelligence, and," he paused, "beauty," he concluded, trying to maintain an expression of tenderness and frankness. "Oh, that's so sweet," Nora said, stepping on her son's toe with her high heel. Melibeo widened his eyes in pain, slowly turned his face to his mother, then grinned, revealing his white teeth. "Our daughter has graduated from a prestigious math school. Moreover, she's an excellent piano player," Agata's mother shared. "Agata, play something for us," she said. "Oh, I'm not very good, but I'd be happy to," she said, and that funny sound echoed again. The girl sat at the piano. Her thin and sparse hair barely covered her shoulders. Her delicate fingers descended onto the keys. She looked at the guests once more, then her fingers danced across the keys. A waltz filled the air. Two families patiently listened to her performance. Smiles adorned their faces, only the spaniel Giorgio, unable to withstand the discord, began to howl at the top of his lungs. 2 minutes later, applause resounded. A joyful Agata returned to the table. "So, what do you say?" Melibeo's mother asked him. "You know," Melibeo replied, nodding, "I enjoyed it. It was cool," he said, meeting his mother's cold gaze. It was spirited, it lifted the mood," he tried to evade, visibly struggling. When dinner was over, Melibeo finally exhaled and returned to himself. Nora and her husband, Valerio, bid farewell to the guests outside. Melibeo picked a grape and tossed it towards the ceiling, catching it in his mouth. Giorgio, although he had never eaten grapes, seemed envious of him. The next day, Melibeo visited Josefa again, under the pretext of getting another shirt tailored. Josefa spoke to Melibeo in a professional manner. They discussed the color, style, and buttons together. Once all the details were settled, Josefa said, "Well then, I need to get back to work. I have orders, so I need to keep up," she said, waiting for Melibeo to leave her house. He stood at the entrance and nodded his head. He hesitated. He wanted to say something to her, to suggest meeting up, but he couldn't say a word. "Melibeo," Josefa called out to him, seeing that he was lost in thought, "I need to work." "See you next week," the girl repeated. Yes, yes, I understand. Can I have just one more moment? The guy finally blurted out. Josefa was listening attentively. Thank you for the chocolate, it was nice of you, he said. Yes, I'm glad, Josefa replied, waiting for the client to leave the house. So, did you decide to make up for that incident at the cafe? Melibio asked. What? The girl laughed. No, I give chocolates to all clients. It's kind of my thing, like a sweet compliment, Josefa explained, causing Melibio to feel a bit awkward. Once again, she proved to be smarter. How about we meet up? He unexpectedly asked the girl. Josefa looked at the guy in confusion. I'm inviting you for a walk into a cafe, Melibio explained. By this time, Josefa had already understood that she found the guy attractive, but at that moment, she genuinely didn't know whether she should agree. We'll just take a stroll, chat, have a meal, and then I'll drive you back home, he continued to persuade. Well, okay. How about Monday, then? It's my day off, the girl responded. Having settled on this, the pair said their goodbyes. After their Monday meeting, Melibio and Josefa continued to see each other on Wednesday, and then again on Monday. During their walks, they talked about various topics, sometimes argued, and goofed around. One day, Melibio invited the girl to ride in his cool and beautiful car. Out of curiosity, Josefa agreed. Previously, she had not only never ridden in such a car, but she hadn't ridden in any car at all. Melibio drove onto an open road, the surface was smooth, and the view was splendid. Do you want to learn to drive? He asked, lifting his sunglasses to his forehead. No, I'll have a driver, the girl replied playfully, tucking away some stray strands of hair. Well, just for variety's sake, Melibio insisted. He wanted to impress Josefa and teach her something new. Sure, I'm not against it, Josefa agreed. The car pulled over on the side of the road. Melibio took off his glasses and looked at Josefa attentively. Her copper eyes and fair blonde hair made her particularly attractive. Melibio lowered his gaze, observing her full lips. But approaching this girl wasn't that simple, she loved and genuinely valued herself. Josefa moved to the driver's seat, and Melibio took her place. All right, pay attention, Melibio began, pressed the brake and clutched simultaneously. Josefa did as he said. Now turn the key, release the brake, and gently press the gas pedal. Josefa was focused, and the car started moving. Get onto the road and drive calmly, just don't go over 80, he warned her. Josefa obediently followed his instructions. The road quickly disappeared beneath the wheels, and she was enjoying the process. You look good behind the wheel, Melibio remarked, amazed at how quickly she grasped the essence of it. The wind tousled their hair, and the car glided smoothly along the road, leaving kilometers behind. Turn on the turn signal to the left of the steering wheel, Melibio commanded, and don't forget to use it, he added. Melibio kept an eye on the road and occasionally glanced at the girl behind the wheel. She was very beautiful. The green shirt cinched at the waist looked stunning on her. Melibio found himself thinking that he had fallen for her. Josefa indeed adapted quickly to the simple rules, and it was easy on the open road. But then a car behind them started to overtake them, passing very close to the mad blue Ford. Melibio heard a scraping sound. A girl with whom he had spent time before, but who had disappeared without a trace, was now at the passenger window. She raised her hand, clutching something metallic in her fist. Melibio realized she had scratched his car. The troublemaker's car sped ahead. A surge of anger coursed through Melibio's veins, and he attempted to calm down but instead shouted, "Catch up to them!" What? Josefa didn't understand. She was already driving at 100 kilometers per hour. Chase them! Melibio repeated, fidgeting in his seat. Josefa pressed down on the gas pedal, and the car accelerated. Then, she decided to get closer to them and turned the steering wheel to the right. Melibio saw his car heading straight for the offenders. He got frightened. Stop! he yelled. "What are you doing?" Josefa, not comprehending what was expected of her, lifted her foot off the pedal. The pursuer's car started to slow down. "What's going on?" Josefa asked, seeking clarification. "I was almost there. I wanted to get closer to them," she explained. Melibio rubbed his forehead. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. Aggressive driving isn't recommended," he said, regretting his actions. "Who are they? Your friends?" Josefa asked, pulling over to the side of the road. "Yes, you could say that." "I'm sorry I involved you in this," Melibio said, then got out of the car. Before him were 3 long strips shimmering in the sunlight. Melibio rubbed his temples with his hands before getting back into the driver's seat. "I don't want to be involved in such conflicts," the girl said. "It's not for me." And here, Josefa was right, and Melibio understood that, but it was too late. On the way back, Josefa took the wheel again. This time, the straight road gave way to steep turns that seemed never-ending. "Brake," Melibio said, but Josefa kept driving at a steady speed of no more than 40. "Brake," Melibio was whispering for some reason. "Brake," he whispered again, as if afraid to disrupt the balance. "SHH," Josefa whispered too. The girl smoothly and confidently entered one turn after another. "Don't tease me," Melibio said slightly indignantly. "I'm not teasing," Josefa said through her laughter. She found it incredibly funny that during the long right turn, Melibio had been whispering, asking her to slow down. This moment was quite strange, dangerous, and funny all at once. The evening came to an end, and Melibio brought Josefa home. He studied her facial features, her exposed shoulders, and he wanted to touch them. He hoped for a kiss, but the girl, thanking him for the incredible adventure, bid him farewell and got out of the car, leaving Melibio alone with his anticipation. What a mystery! Why like this? Wondered the guy. He saw in Josefa a very strong person, even though she was 5 years younger than him. It amazed, impressed, and simultaneously ignited a strong desire in Melibio to truly make his mark on this life. The girl showed Melibio a whole new perspective on the world. He was greatly surprised when he learned that one could find joy in simple things like a good night's sleep, a well-brewed cup of coffee, friendly interactions with customers, or completing a task ahead of schedule. This was foreign to Melibio. He never had to rush anywhere or achieve anything. Coffee was always prepared for him by a chef, and speaking about genuine friendships, he never pondered them. And to finish something by a deadline, well, Melibio didn't have personal responsibilities that required him to do so. He knew that his time would come, and he would comfortably take his mother's place. Josefa became an amazing person in his eyes. With each meeting, he grew more and more amazed by her. She truly charmed him. So sweet, gentle, and full of life. And so determined, responsible, and, most importantly, with a clear goal ahead. This made Melibio contemplate his future more deeply. Becoming the head of a bank was a fantastic job, financially secure. But Melibio wanted to learn to overcome obstacles himself and carve his own path. Back home, he thought about how he could do something nice for Josefa. He wanted to impress her, accomplish something noteworthy. All those typical rooftop dates or car rides were just entertainment. But to truly, Melibio was racking his brain. Spaniel Giorgio entered the room, carrying a fashion magazine in his mouth, something his mother often flipped through. "Since when have you been interested in fashion?" Melibio playfully asked the Spaniel. In response, he received the magazine and a slobbery hand. "Ouch, Giorgio!" the guy exclaimed. He immediately took out a wet wipe and wiped his hand. Then his gaze fell upon the fashion magazine, and he began to think. For about 20 minutes, he sat still, looking at the magazine cover featuring a happy girl in a beautiful and stylish lavender dress. In the next few seconds, a fantastic idea dawned on him, causing his heart to beat faster. Right now, more than ever, he was sure that this would work. Energized by this thought, which had now evolved into a genuine goal, Melibeo walked into the living room with a smile on his face. There he met his mother, Agata. It turned out that the girl had come to visit him and brought him a book that had become one of her favorites. Melibeo put on a grin, just like his mother had taught him for cases when you don't particularly like a person but need to be polite. "Hey there," Agata greeted. He replied in kind. "Thanks for the book, I'll definitely read it." A little later, a smile never left his lips. "I have something very important to do right now, I need to rush," Melibeo said, kissing his mother's cheek and hurrying away. "Your son is so sweet, a real marvel," Agata said, undoubtedly feeling like the only one Melibeo dreams of. Nora, fully aware that Agata didn't arouse any interest in her son, also smiled at her in response. And meanwhile, Melibeo arrived at the cafe. Before coming here, he had already called a few of his acquaintances. They had gathered around a round table, the girls eagerly waiting for Melibeo to reveal the reason for their gathering. "Girls, I'm so grateful that you agreed to come here. Right now, I need real help from you, your smiles and all your talent for posing. So, what do you say?" Melibeo cheerfully asked, confident that they would surely agree. "Last month, you promised to call me back, and you never did," one of them exclaimed indignantly. "And I waited for you for 3 hours, and now I'm supposed to help you at your beck and call." A girl twisted her dissatisfied face. Melibeo frowned. He hadn't realized that so many of the girls were upset. All his attempts to persuade them to pose for a fashion magazine had failed. "Okay, I admit it, I'm a scoundrel, you can hate me, I deserve it," Melibeo said, giving up. The girls left him, leaving him completely alone. "It's not that simple, after all," the guy muttered to himself. However, remembering Agata, Melibeo jumped up from the table and rushed home. He met her at the doorstep. She was getting ready to leave. "Oh, Agata, what a meeting," Melibeo said, trying to control his breath. "And I have an enticing proposal for you," he said. Agata looked at Nora in surprise, hope gleaming in her eyes. "Can I talk to you privately?" he asked, smirking. "Of course, you can," she agreed joyfully. Nora widened her eyes. She was taken aback by her son's sudden change in behavior. "So, I have a proposal for you," Melibeo began, telling her his idea. "So, you'll be on the cover of the magazine in the trendiest dress," he concluded. "I was expecting something a bit different from you, but I'll be happy to help you," she said. Melibeo heard so much sincerity and purity in her words that his conscience almost began to gnaw at him for using the girl for his purposes. When Melibeo managed to convince the models for the magazine, he went to Josefa. She opened the door. "Oh, Melibeo, hello. Sorry, I can't spend time with you right now, I need to finish with these trousers," she replied. Melibeo widened his eyes, giving them such a pitiful look that Josefa melted. "Well, all right, just not more than half an hour, okay?" she said. Melibeo quickly nodded. When the guy shared the idea with the girl, Josefa seriously considered it. "Everything sounds great, it's cool, I like it. But where will we get the funds?" She asked a reasonable question. She wasn't used to someone giving her such large sums of money. "I'll take responsibility for all the expenses," Melibeo blurted out. I agree," Josefa immediately responded. She hadn't expected herself to answer so quickly. However, she wasn't afraid that Melibeo might suddenly ask for the money back. Somewhere deep down, she firmly knew that this would end successfully. And even if not, the strong motivation to start acting in this direction was very intense. It would be a very interesting experience. From that day on, Josefa actively started preparing for the event. There were many guests at her house. While one girl was trying on a dress and Josefa adjusted the fabric, the other 5 were sitting in the kitchen with Grandpa Leo, drinking coffee with raspberry jam and gingerbread cookies, while the old man told the girls various stories from his life. "We had a man in our village," Grandpa Leo was saying, "a man of immense strength. She was tall with big shoulders like you wouldn't believe. He spread his arms wide, splaying his fingers. So, he's walking with his horse to collect firewood in the forest. At this point, one of the girls interrupted him. With his bare hands? She wondered. Yeah, Grandpa continued, and so, he loads the cart to the top and starts going back with the firewood. And he had to go uphill. The girls were listening with their mouths open. And then, the horse is going uphill, pulling the cart almost to the top, but can't manage to haul it further. What should he do? He asked rhetorically. So, the man takes matters into his own hands, hitches himself to the cart instead of the horse. The girls gasped. Yeah, Grandpa Leo continued, he hitches himself and pulls it himself. And he hauls the cart up the hill. What strength he had. The old man finished. Oh, what a man, simply a treasure, exclaimed one of them, the rest were wide-eyed. Thus passed the days of the future magazine models. Taking measurements, fitting clothes, talking with Grandpa Leo, and coffee. Josefa worked diligently like a bee, sketching designs, making patterns, fitting dresses to the figure, selecting fabric, and fine-tuning details. Agata kept an eye on the girls' discipline. Meanwhile, Melibio was searching for a suitable location for the photo shoot, arranging photographers and lighting. After a month of hard work, everything was ready for the show. Josefa was very nervous. Melibio was nervous too. But what worried him most was that he had managed to organize such an event on his own, gathering people, finding a venue, and planning the advertising. And that was already a big success. You look irresistible, Melibio said, addressing Josefa. She was applying makeup. With a skillful movement, she outlined one eyeliner, then the other. Thanks, nice to hear, Josefa replied, smiling at his reflection in the mirror. The rhythmical music started playing. The spotlights shone brightly. On both sides of the spacious rectangular hall, there were invited guys and girls, men and women. The host, who happened to be a friend of Melibio's, announced the beginning of the evening, and the first pair of girls came out in summer jumpsuits. They were stylish, vibrant, and beautiful, and they walked down the red carpet, confidently swaying their hips. Christina's efforts, as Josefa's friend, hadn't gone to waste. 2 more pairs followed them, wearing jumpsuits with shorts of different colors. The audience in the hall was sitting silently. At first, they couldn't figure out how to react. The second wave delighted the attendees with summer dresses with long skirts. The girls looked very elegant and feminine in these outfits. Applause filled the room. Josefa, who was backstage, anxiously observed the reactions of the audience. Then the host paused and played a small game with the audience. During this time, the models managed to change clothes and touch up their makeup. The music started playing again, more energetic this time. On the red carpet, charming girls appeared in loose-fitting women's shirts cinched at the waist with belts and leggings. This outfit accentuated the waistline perfectly and created the universally loved hourglass shape for any body type. Men eagerly followed the gaze of the models as they confidently strode across the stage, looking straight ahead. Everything about them was splendid: the clothing, shoes, facial expressions, and hairstyles. They attracted playful smiles from men and envious glances from women. Josefa, who had remained in the shadows all this time, trembled with pleasure and felt shivers from the overwhelming emotions about the work she had done. "Aren't you freezing?" Melibio asked her, sneaking up behind her and placing his hand on her shoulder. Josefa flinched, but smiled. "No, come on, such tension. How could I freeze?" The girl replied, continuing to watch the scene. The guests were delighted, their faces were glowing, and shouts of joy could be heard. Melibio took Josefa's hand and placed it in his palm. He intertwined his fingers with hers and felt a slight roughness on the surface of her skin. "Oh, it's better not to touch my hands right now," Josefa said, withdrawing her hand. She turned her palm upward. Barely noticeable white spots were visible on the fingertip pads. "I have calluses from hard work," she laughed, mimicking the actions. Rolling, gathering, and holding the fabric, she gestured. "Yesterday, In order to finish on time, I was working until midnight, she said with a light smile. Melibeo once again noticed her determination and perseverance. There was much he could learn from this girl. You're incredible, Melibeo said. You're inspiring me, he confessed. Josefa blossomed. Thank you for organizing everything. It's a lot of work. And it's amazing, she repeated, raising her eyebrows high. Both laughed. Melibeo approached Josefa, his gaze lowered to her enticing lips, and an unknown force pulled them together, leaving only a couple of centimeters between them. Josefa, get ready, Domingo announced as he approached. With that said, he headed to the dressing room where the girls were. How quickly time flew. Josefa said and disappeared into the dressing room. Melibeo stood behind the scenes. The face of the girl was still in his mind, so close just a moment ago. Ladies and gentlemen, our event is coming to an end, the host said. And now, I present to you the person who, in fact, created all these wonderful outfits with her delicate hands. Dado Josefa. He pronounced the name loudly. Josefa felt a rush of heat in her head and ears. She wasn't prepared for such attention to herself. Go on, Josefa, forward, Domingo whispered, nudging her onto the stage. Josefa walked down the red carpet. Bright lights dazzled her, and flashes from the photographers disoriented her. She hadn't realized that walking there and back would be so challenging. She saw the faces of people looking at her attentively, watching her every step. Someone was pointing at her and saying something to their neighbor. The girl felt a slight dizziness. She wasn't accustomed to such a large number of eyes on her. When she returned backstage, her heart was pounding wildly, and her mouth felt dry. Melibeo hurried over, holding her arms. Are you okay? You're shaking all over, he said, and it was evident he was worried. At this moment, Josefa couldn't help but utter a word. She was breathing and trying to calm down. And that's when Melibeo first felt that he was needed by her like never before. He embraced Josefa and pulled her close. SHHSHHSHH, everything's fine, everything's absolutely amazing. You looked stunning, he whispered, swaying with her. The showroom event was a great success. It stirred up the city. The name Josefa Dado was on everyone's mind. After such a big project, Josefa closed herself off at home and didn't want to go anywhere. It seemed to her that everyone was pointing fingers at her. She realized she wasn't ready for the intense attention or to be noticed. Josefa lay on her couch, wrapped in a blanket, holding a cup of milk coffee. After it was all over, she wanted to burrow into her burrow so that nobody could see her. Josefa, hey, my dear, Christina whispered. She entered so quietly that Josefa didn't notice her right away. Christina, she said, emerging from under the blanket and hugging her friend. I'll bring you some coffee now, she said. Josefa returned with a tray, on which there was tea and sweets. It's all so unfamiliar, Josefa said, taking a piece of chocolate. You'll have to get used to it, Christina replied. Well, if you think this was a huge event, then imagine that someone else does it even more frequently. So you're just one artist in a huge theater, her friend smiled. As for me, I'm delighted. I enjoyed it so much that I want to participate again. Christina looked up and smiled widely, envisioning the next show. And that handsome guy, by the way, Melibeo, are you two together? Christina's eyes sparkled with mischief. Then she took a small piece of a divided pastry cube and popped it into her mouth. Josefa hesitated with her answer. I don't know yet. Right now, we're just getting to know each other, she replied thoughtfully. She had always been cautious about people, especially guys. She never felt a strong need for a boyfriend. There were always other interests in her life that brought her joy. The next day, Josefa fell back into her familiar routine. It seemed like the fashion show had taken place not 3 days ago, but an entire month ago, as it was so different from her usual life. She focused on sewing. Today, they brought her fabric for curtains. Josefa pressed the pedal, the sewing machine stitched a straight line, and the activity calmed her down. In the meantime, Melibeo had called once, but Josefa wasn't bothered by it since she wasn't thinking about him. Someone knocked at the door. "Grandpa, I'll get it," Josefa said, heading towards the door. There was Melibeo on the doorstep, looking slightly mysterious. "What's this intrigue about?" Josefa asked, smiling. She was happy to see Melibeo. The guy realized that he had genuinely piqued her interest and decided to take advantage of that. "Revealing this intrigue costs 2 kisses," he said, hiding his hands behind his back. Josefa stood there in silence, not knowing how to respond. "Okay, just one, only one little kiss," Melibeo said. Josefa pressed her hand to her lips and blew him an air kiss. Melibeo was amazed. "You're being tricky," he protested. "That's not fair." "You didn't specify what kind of kiss, though," Josefa laughed. Melibeo handed her a magazine. On the cover, she recognized one of the girls who had participated in the fashion show, and above it was a big headline, "The sun has illuminated our city." Josefa flipped through all the pages. The photos were breathtaking. It seemed as if she hadn't sewn those clothes at all. "This is incredible. Just mind-blowing," Josefa exclaimed, then lunged at Melibeo and gave him a quick kiss on the lips. She jumped and rejoiced like a child who had received an unexpected surprise. "You're a genius, plain and simple. You're a magician. How did you do this? Amazing." She couldn't believe her eyes. "I just negotiated with the right people," Melibeo said, satisfied that he managed to do something worthy for the girl he was clearly falling in love with. "You have talent," Josefa complimented him. "You need to know how to communicate with people," she added, looking into Melibeo's eyes. At that moment, he felt himself growing stronger in his own eyes and in the eyes of the person who was meaningful to him. "Josefa, be my girlfriend," Melibeo unexpectedly said. "Your girlfriend?" Josefa repeated. "And what does that mean, yours? I'm not an object, am I?" she asked, playfully confusing him again. No, of course not," Melibeo stumbled. "I meant that I would like to ask if you'd like to date me. I'd like to take care of you, help you." Melibeo didn't manage to finish his sentence. SHHSHHSH, Josefa placed her palm on his lips. "You can't know that in advance," she said, lightly kissing him on his lips. Melibeo was over the moon. Melibeo and Josefa continued to communicate as before. On their free days, they chatted a lot, discussed various topics, went driving, and swam in the river until September came. After the successful launch of the first magazine issue, Melibeo decided to continue this endeavor. He also created a YouTube channel where he posted interviews with different interesting people from the city. It was Josefa who helped him tap into his unique ability to build relationships with people, and Melibeo really enjoyed it. He felt his strength in this aspect and knew he could rely on it to take further steps. "Mom, we'll have guests today," Melibeo announced. "Really? And who is it?" Nora inquired, trying on earrings with her dress. Today, she returned from work early, so she was getting ready to go for a massage. "You look very beautiful," Melibeo complimented her. "Thank you, my dear," the mother replied, patting her son's cheek. "Be home by 6, Melibeo said, bidding farewell to his mother. The chef had prepared exquisite dishes and drinks, and dessert was eagerly waiting its turn. Nora and Valerio were sitting around the round table, waiting for their son to come. The husband and wife were a bit bored. Valerio was playing with an olive, trying to spear it with his fork. "Valerio!" His wife stopped him, and he obediently put the fork back in its place. Then, the tall doors swung open, and Melibeo and Josefa entered the living room. Melibeo's father, Valerio, was pleasantly surprised to see such a lovely lady next to his son. On the other hand, Nora tilted her chin up and cast a few glances at the girl from head to toe. For Melibeo's mother, however, her full figure caught her attention immediately. Josefa was wearing a modestly fitted dress with a cinched waist, but it still revealed her slight extra weight. Mom, Dad, meet Josefa, she's my girlfriend, Melibeo said joyfully. Nora's eyes widened, and she almost dropped her jaw, but managed to hide it behind a smile. Josefa greeted them in return. Oh, what a delight! Nora lied, discreetly glancing at the girl from top to bottom. Our son is so funny, she said to her husband. Josefa, not paying attention to her words, walked with Melibeo to the table. He helped her sit down. Valerio caught his son's gaze and was genuinely pleased with his choice. Josefa, you probably can't eat anything too fatty. Are you on a diet? Nora sarcastically commented, putting a piece of salty fish into her mouth. I must tell you, Josefa replied, that I don't follow any diets and, furthermore, I consider my figure unique, she responded, quite content with her answer. Nora made sure to stretch her lips into a smile. Well, son, will you tell us how you met the charming Josefa? The father asked. Nora cast a sidelong glance at him, masking her displeasure. Melibeo recalled their first encounter. Josefa looked at him with a plea in her eyes not to mention the cafe. You could say that our paths crossed due to a series of circumstances, Melibeo began. I came to pick up a completed order and have a shirt made for myself, he explained. And who was kind enough to tell you about such a seamstress? Nora asked, as politely as possible, looking at the girl with a hint of disdain. Your sister, Mom, Aunt Rosa, Melibeo answered. Nora was taken aback. To cover her awkwardness, she took a sip of her juice. By the way, this summer, Josefa had her first fashion show where her clothes that she made herself using her own patterns were demonstrated, Melibeo said. Seriously? Wow! The father exclaimed. Congratulations! So, have you been doing this for a long time? Maybe you've graduated from a relevant educational institution? The father asked. Oh, no, I'm self-taught, Josefa replied effortlessly. A couple of years ago, a neighbor gave me an old sewing machine. We found materials from a long time ago in the storage. And everything fell into place, the girl said, taking a bite of the caviar sandwich. An orange speck of caviar got stuck above her upper lip. At that moment, Nora looked at Josefa, who was desperately trying to remove it with her tongue. Nora, who herself loved new outfits very much and never missed out on fashion trends, couldn't wrap her head around how an ordinary girl managed to organize such a project. Josefa, did you have money or savings to finance the event? She asked, looking directly at the girl. Oh, it was your son's idea, Josefa replied. He took care of all the expenses, she said. Nora was flabbergasted. Her son took money from the family budget for some unknown girl. Oh, I see. Nora said, looking at Valerio. Melibeo pressed the corner of his right lip. He had forgotten to warn Josefa not to mention this. His mother was very possessive of money. She calculated expenses daily, always forgiving herself for large expenses on clothing and interior items. Well, son, I'm glad that for once you've directed the funds in the right direction, Valerio laughed. Thanks, Dad, Melibeo nodded. He knew he had a bit of a bad habit of spending his father's money on trivial things. And Josefa is launching her own magazine, Melibeo said. But I'm not involved in that at all, the guest objected. You completely organized the process of creating the magazine yourself, Josefa said. What? The father asked, not believing his ears. My son creating something himself? Is this a joke? He laughed again. Nora maintained her mask of friendliness. In reality, greed and jealousy gnawed at her from the inside. She had noticed that this girl truly meant something to him. She felt as if she was slowly but surely being pushed into the background. Dinner came to an end. Josefa thanked Melibeo's family for their hospitality and the wonderful dinner. Yes, thank you, Josefa, but I would still recommend you eat less and in smaller portions, okay? Nora said. I'll definitely consider your suggestion, Josefa replied, feeling a growing desire to respond to Melibeo's mother in a way that would prevent her from entertaining such thoughts in the future. Melibeo drove Josefa home. Compared to your family, I look like a simple village girl, the girl said. My mom, she's always jealous of me, Melibeo was saying. I think you'll get along with her, he said, and they said their goodbyes. Son, dear, his mother addressed him when he got back home. You don't actually mean to say that you're planning to tie your life to this, she searched for the right words, to this girl. Nora restrained herself from saying something mean. That's exactly what I wanted to tell you and Dad. And I think I made that clear, Melibeo replied. You're disappointing me, his mother said with a voice that sounded like it was about to break into tears. Mom, she's a good girl, determined, Melibeo said. Determined? His mother flared up, raising her voice. She comes from a poor family, what determination are you talking about? People like her have a bad reputation, she said in a steely tone. She'll tarnish our family. Think about what your father will say? She asked angrily. I talked to Dad, he liked Josefa, Melibeo said. He gave you that answer because he knows your nature, which quickly loses interest in everything around you. He thinks you'll get tired and settle down. But I see it, his mother said, raising the fingers of one hand in the air. You must stop all communication with her, Nora said, shifting to a calm tone. We can't allow newspapers to write such things about us. We're responsible for our reputation and position in society. Go, she said when she finished speaking. Melibeo left his mother's room. The spaniel followed her. He felt that his companion was upset about something. Melibeo didn't argue with his mother. He knew it was futile. This beautiful, wealthy woman, endowed with a certain power, was actually plagued by fears that tormented her. But Melibeo didn't know how he could change her perspective. When the winter came, everything slowed and calmed down a bit. And when winter fully set in, it forced the residents to wait out the harsh frost by the fireplace, wrapped in warm blankets. While they warmed up under soft throws, Josefa was bringing to life new ideas for warm winter skirts in bright and interesting colors. She was happy when clients were pleased with the updates. Under Melibeo's guidance, a magazine with new clothing models for both women and men was published every 2 months. Melibeo was really pleased to be involved in this field. But with the arrival of spring, life revived again. The sun shone brighter, the earth warmed up more, and people began to feel the energy of love and the desire to live. It had been almost a year since Melibeo and Josefa had been together. Unable to wait any longer, Melibeo took decisive steps. Ah, Melibeo, hello, come in, Leo said, opening the door for him. How are you? Melibeo asked, shaking his hand. Thank you, I'm doing well, thanks. All three of them gathered around the table. Josefa had prepared a delicious lunch. Despite limited resources, Josefa always cooked deliciously. When everyone was ready to start the meal, Melibeo unexpectedly stood up from the table. I have a small interruption from lunch, he said, stepping away from the table. Josefa watched with interest to see what would happen next. Melibeo got down on one knee and unexpectedly presented an engagement ring with the words, Josefa, marry me, he said. In that moment, he was so genuine. Josefa looked at her grandfather, who sat silently with a frozen spoon in his hand. This is all so unexpected, she said. Are you sure about this? Josefa asked. I know you're changing my life. Being with you makes me want to better myself, he said. I'm ready to learn how to take responsibility for my future family, Melibeo said. His words brought a sense of delight to Josefa. She wanted to keep listening to them. I agree, the girl replied. The golden ring placed on her ring fingers sent shivers down Josefa's spine. It looked exquisite. The wedding was set for a month later. Melibeo, upon returning home, shared this joyful news with his mother and father. He didn't care what they would think. He knew that this girl loved him and that he was willing to do a lot for her, something he had never done before. Upon hearing this, Nora was silent for a moment, then she found something to say. Melibeo, his mother began, keeping herself composed, please, tell me that this isn't true, that you're just trying to upset your dear mother," she said. Valerio came up from behind and hugged her shoulders, but she paid no attention. Nora put her hand on her forehead. "Dear, say something," she addressed her husband. Valerio shrugged. "I trust my son's choice. What can I say? I can't force him to stop loving this girl," he said. "She's blinded you," Nora exclaimed, walking over to the open window. "Understand that she only wants your money. She's already forced you to pay for her whims with ridiculous outfits and a ridiculous fashion show," she said. Her face turned red, and her bad blood stirred in the mother's body. She believed that since she gave birth to the child, she had the right to decide who he should be with. "Don't speak like that," Melibio responded. "I took this responsibility upon myself," he said steadfastly. "You took the responsibility?" "Haha," Nora scoffed at him. "Dear, stop it, you're only making things worse," Valerio attempted to reason with her. "There will be no wedding," Nora said in a cold tone. 2 blue ice shards pierced through Melibio. After that, Nora left the living room. "Son," his father tried to console him, "don't worry, this will pass." "Women are like that," he said, following his wife. From that day on, Nora's life changed drastically. Tranquilly left her mind and heart. From now on, she lived with the desire to separate the couple and bring her son back to her. Nora couldn't allow the girl she raised, in whom she invested all her motherly love, to be taken away by some simpleton, a village girl, a peasant. The woman paced back and forth, occasionally looking out the window. She was waiting for Melibio to arrive. "Nora," the maid's voice sounded, "would you like some coffee?" The woman in her 50s offered. "Ah, Viola," the mother said with sadness in her voice. "I feel restless. How do I reason with my son?" she asked, flopping down on the couch, her long summer dress softly spread on the seat. "I'm afraid I can't help you with that here." "Your husband is right," she added. "Bring me a cup of hot coffee," Nora said in a voice filled with tenderness. She had always liked Viola. She was the only woman in her circle from a less privileged family whom she could trust with all her secrets, as strange as it might sound. In their conversations, she sometimes felt like a little girl surrounded by a mother's love. Nora herself, along with her sister Rosa, grew up in a forgotten-by-God village. Moving to the city for education, they desperately tried to escape poverty, working hard, dedicating all their time to studies and work. Finally, their efforts paid off. Nora and Rosa graduated from a prestigious banking school. However, Rosa got married quite well soon after. As for Nora, she got a job at a bank. She started from the bottom, but thanks to her skills and her acquaintance with Valerio, who was already a young and promising lawyer at the time, she quickly climbed her way up to becoming the bank's manager. Being a successful and prosperous woman, a rare feat for someone like her, Nora couldn't shake the fear that it could all disappear in an instant. She already had a big, beautiful house, a car with a personal driver, servants, expensive possessions, delicious food, a beloved son, and a loving husband. But the feeling that she didn't deserve all this never left her. And now, the unexpectedly appearing Josefa became a direct threat to her personal happiness. This girl reminded her of her past life, which she had carefully tried to forget and desperately wanted to escape. "Nora," the maid returned, "here's your freshly brewed coffee," she said affectionately. Nora's heart warmed. Melibio stopped by briefly. "He asked me to tell you he's busy." "He needs to go," Viola said. "I understand." "You can go," the woman whispered softly. Nora was sitting there, her fingers intertwined. She flexed and unflexed them, then folded them again and straightened them out. Nora was contemplating her next move. The wedding must not happen. There was a week left until the wedding. She put on her best pantsuit with an elegant cutout on the back, a wide-brimmed hat and glasses completed her expressive look. She instructed the driver about the address and set out to meet someone. "Welcome to our exclusive establishment," a pleasant girl at the entrance of the VIP guest restaurant said. Nora smiled at the corners of her lips and headed to the reserved table. Someone was already waiting for her here. It was a man around 47 years old. He looked very young for his age, and his lavender shirt gave him a fresh appearance. Nora took off her glasses and hat. "Hello, dear," the man said, greeting her and kissing her hand. "I'm delighted to see you. You're still beautiful and young," he complimented her. "Antonio, I'm very glad you agreed to meet." Nora spoke. She looked at his clean-shaven face, his tanned skin, and his blue eyes that sparkled with fire. "I really need your help." "It's not something too serious, it's personal," she said. "My love, I'll do anything for you," he said, bringing a wine glass to his lips. "I need to temporarily kidnap someone." "A girl," Nora said. "Oh wow!" Antonio exclaimed. "How dare she cross my queen's path?" He continued, showering Nora with flattering words. He had been a longtime friend of Nora. Once, in their distant youth, they were very close, but Nora made the choice in favor of Valerio, a successful and promising future husband. "Not me, but my son," she replied. "She's clouding his mind, constantly demanding money," Nora lied. She didn't believe that Antonio needed to know the whole truth. "I just need her taken far away from here, so she can't find her way back." "Can you handle it?" she asked, taking a sip of the red drink. "Easy." "When should I kidnap her?" Antonio asked, regretting that this woman had once left him. "Tomorrow," Nora replied, adjusting a strand of hair. "I'll send you the address later." "Once you've done it, call me," she said, then added, "just make sure everything is neat and quiet." "As you wish," Antonio replied. Nora put on her glasses, hat, and left the establishment. Antonio reached out and took Nora's glass, on which traces of her lipstick remained. He ran his thumb along the mark. He regretted not being able to become her husband. Nora returned home, full of energy. She was in a good mood, and a smile radiated from her face. She was glad she could protect her family from harm. "Mom, hi," Melibio cheerfully said, returning home after numerous errands. When Josefa appeared, his life gained meaning. It was as if new doors had opened, and he could see things he wouldn't have been able to see before. "Son, my dear, come here," Nora said. "I want you to know that I love you," she said, hoping to evoke a sense of conscience in him. "I love you too, Mom," Melibio replied after kissing her cheek. "It's something your father passed down to you," she said, handing him an envelope. "What's this?" Melibio didn't understand. "I don't know what he wanted to tell you in there," Nora answered, taking off her jewelry and placing it on the table. Melibio returned to his room. Opening the letter, he read a few lines. "Dear son, I deeply regret the decision I've made, but I can't go against the will of my beloved woman. I'm forced to inform you that if you don't end your relationship with Josefa, I'll have to close your bank account and cut you off from the inheritance." And a line below, "Follow your heart." Melibio was in shock. He didn't expect this turn of events. Sweat broke out on his forehead as there was only a week left until the wedding. The restaurant was booked and the guests were invited. Everything was already prepared and waiting for payment in the coming days. Melibio crumpled the letter, grabbed his jacket, and quickly left the house. Nora approached the window. Melibio opened the door of his car, looked up. His gaze met his mother's eyes. Nora felt a wave of emotion. She had never been in such a confrontation with her son before. Remembering the address, she picked up her phone and called her sister. "Hello, Rosa, hi, listen. I wanted to get a dress tailored for myself too. Could you give me the number of the atelier where you've been getting your dresses made lately?" She mumbled in an angelic voice. "Why not? Of course, I'll send it right away. You'll be thrilled. The girl is really good, she tailors professionally," Rosa said. Nora graciously agreed with her sister. When she received the address, she immediately forwarded it to Antonio. However, instead of the usual okay, she received a message with a question, "Will we meet?" Nora furrowed her brows. "What?" she exclaimed aloud. "What the hell?" She was outraged. Viola entered the room at the sound. "Is everything okay? Is everything all right?" she asked, concerned. "Yes, the phone just stopped working, and I urgently need to make a call," Nora lied. "What are you talking about?" "I'll pay you," Nora sent the next message. And immediately received a reply, "I don't need money, you know that." "Oh my God, how terrible," Nora whispered. And she texted him, "When the job is done, I'm yours." Her heart was pounding furiously, and sweat covered her body. "You're a little fox, so cunning, I know you. I'll be waiting for you tomorrow in the same place." Nora stared at the message, her mouth agape. She was in shock. Then she mechanically called Antonio. His phone was already switched off. "Damn!" Nora exclaimed, grimacing in disbelief. Meanwhile, Melibio headed to the bank. The bank's app on his phone displayed the amount, but he couldn't withdraw it. Asking for assistance from an employee, he waited for a response. "I'm sorry, but unfortunately, your account is blocked," the woman replied. Melibio thanked her and headed to his car. However, he was surprised to find it missing. Melibio dialed his father's number, and he heard in the receiver, "I'm in a meeting in another city, please leave a message." His father, indeed, always set up an automatic response when he went on a business trip. Not knowing what to do, Melibio hailed a taxi and headed to Josefa's house. The door was opened by Leo. "Melibio, hello, come in." As always, he was warm and kind. "Is there something that's bothering you?" Grandpa Leo asked, immediately noticing concern on Melibio's face. Josefa appeared in the hallway. "What happened?" she asked, looking at her future groom, whose face had turned pale. "An unforeseen circumstance has occurred," Melibio began to explain. "You see, my father has blocked my bank account and taken the car away," he said. "What does that mean?" Josefa didn't understand. "It means that we won't be able to pay for the celebration and the restaurant. We'll have to cancel everything and just marry without the party for now," Melibio concluded. "I borrowed some money from a friend. It should last for a while, and then I'll find a job," he added. After his father's letter, he decided not to go back home. "Humph," Grandpa chuckled, "your parents really cut you off well." Then he sat down at the table. Josefa also suggested that Melibio come into the kitchen. "Yes, it's tough when you go against your parents' will," he said, pulling the cup of coffee that Josefa had just poured closer to him. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee was soothing. "I even feel embarrassed to look at you now," Melibio said. "What's there to be embarrassed about? You're already an independent young man. It's time to provide for yourself and your future wife, since you're planning to get married," Leo said. "I agree," Melibio replied, glancing at his future bride. "But I'm more concerned about how you'll communicate with your parents afterwards. It will be heavy on your heart," Josefa said, sipping her coffee. "God help us," Grandpa replied to his granddaughter and her fiancé. After the conversation, Melibio went to his friend Rodrigo's house. They agreed that he would stay with him for a while. And that's what they did. And meanwhile, Nora was contemplating her situation. Throughout her life, she has remained faithful to her husband. Not once did the thought of infidelity cross his mind. But now, with her own life and the happiness of her beloved son at stake, she was willing to do whatever it took. There was no time left to delay. She had to take action. Nora couldn't sleep for the entire night. Unsettling thoughts haunted her mind. Finally, she fell asleep. She dreamt that she was standing in a restaurant, wearing a beautiful long blue dress. In her hand, she was holding a glass of red wine, whose rich taste was pleasant on her palate. Then a dark-skinned man with blue eyes appeared, approaching Nora closely. It was Antonio. He took the glass from her hand and emptied it, then touched her slender neck with his wet tongue. Nora felt an unprecedented pleasure. She didn't try to stop Antonio. On the contrary, she thirsted for his affection, gradually surrendering herself to him completely. When Antonio finally took control of her, she heard a familiar voice. "Nora, what are you doing, Nora?" It was her husband. Nora stopped, but Antonio continued to caress her. She tried to break free, but his grip held her firmly. Then Nora saw a multitude of curious eyes looking at her with condemnation. With each passing minute, it became harder and harder for her to breathe, and finally, Nora woke up in a cold sweat, screaming. The clock showed 5 in the evening. Nora was taking a bath. Luxurious foam covered her still young body. She rose from the water and wrapped herself in a towel. Then she walked to her wardrobe, going through her outfits. Picking up the first silver dress she found, she placed it on the bed. She did natural makeup, using precise eyeliner and bold red lipstick. Nora styled her hair into a perfect bun. Calling a taxi, she left for the meeting place. Pleasant music pleased her ears. A courteous hostess led her to the designated private room for VIP guests. Here, without prying ears, any topic could be discussed. "I'm delighted to see you again, my love," Antonio said, and, as he always did, he kissed Nora's hand. "Let's leave here quickly, I'm begging you," Nora said, slightly nervous. "One mustn't rush in such matters," Antonio replied, slightly loosening his tie on his light pink shirt. He always dressed with taste, which once captivated Nora. "You're making me take a big risk," Nora said, trying to convey her anxiety. "You too," Antonio replied, smiling and placing his large hand over hers. "Maybe we should have a drink?" he suggested, opening the menu. Nora didn't know what to say. She hadn't intended to spend the evening with him. However, unbeknownst to herself, she had truly entered a dangerous game. The waiter brought glasses, wine, and a platter of cheese and meat. "You still evoke feelings in me, can you imagine?" Antonio said, examining Nora's high cheekbones and sensual lips. "Why didn't you marry that girl, do you remember?" she asked him, trying to shift the conversation to a more casual topic. "I was always hoping that your icy heart would melt, and you would come back to me," he said, sipping his wine and putting a slice of cheese in his mouth. "See, I still live with that hope," he continued, unabashedly examining the delicate skin of her décolletage. Nora felt awkward. She wanted to cover herself with a blanket. When the torture in the restaurant was finally over, the couple headed towards the exit. Antonio had taken care of the car in advance, as well as their destination. He drove Nora to his luxurious country house. It was adorned with wood and stone, with lamps everywhere, illuminating the green garden and the beautiful courtyard in front of the house. "You could live here, you know," Antonio said, gesturing to showcase the beauty of his home. "Maybe we should take a swim?" he suggested, looking at the pool. Nora began to hope that perhaps Antonio had changed his mind about his proposal. He unbuttoned his shirt, took off his pants, and then, with a short run, jumped into the water. The thought of running crossed Nora's mind, but then she remembered their agreement. She took off her dress and slowly entered the water. "You're doing great," Antonio said, getting closer while swimming. "Relax, let's just enjoy ourselves. When was the last time you were carefree and spontaneous?" Nora didn't think it was necessary to answer. She was swimming on her back, watching Antonio's movements the whole time. "Dive," Antonio said, "I'll see you underwater." He dove in and quickly swam towards Nora. She swam away from him, but Antonio caught up to her within a second and lifted her up in his arms. Nora gasped in surprise. "I like you better this way," he said, pressing his body against hers. Sliding his hand into her hair, he let them loose. The white strands fell onto her shoulders. "I remember you like this," Antonio said, passionately kissing her lips. Nora realized that she couldn't escape anymore. The next early morning, Nora returned home. She prayed that no one would be at home. Once inside, she hurried to the bathroom of her room. The locked door and the silence gave her a sense of tranquility. She turned on the warm shower and stepped into it. Streams of water glided down her body. She tried to rid herself of the memories that resurfaced in her mind like vivid images. Antonio's house was truly beautiful and tastefully decorated, just like his. Her lips still remembered his kisses, and her body remembered the touch of his hands. She had to admit, she was satisfied. 2 days before Melibeo and Josefa's wedding, Grandpa Leo went to the city on business. After completing all his tasks, instead of returning home, he went to the address where Melibeo lived. The maid opened the door. She let him in. In the living room, surprisingly, all the family members were present, including Valerio, Nora, and Melibeo. None of them expected the old man's arrival. Leo assumed that Melibeo had come to negotiate with his parents. However, he had already made up his mind. Leaving a stack of money on the table, he declared, "Here's the amount needed for the wedding. Melibeo, pay for whatever is necessary, and that's it." "Pure and bright love is a gift," Leo said. Valerio was shocked by his actions, but Leo continued, "I see, and you probably do too, that our children genuinely love each other. So, let's not take on the sin of destroying their love," the old man concluded, then turned around and headed for the door. "Leo, wait." Melibeo called out to him. "Don't you know? Josefa has been kidnapped," he blurted out. Leo's face darkened. He furrowed his brows but immediately understood who was behind them. He walked over to the table and looked at Nora. She lowered her eyes, unable to bear the weight of his gaze. Yet, the old man's dark brown eyes remained fixed. "Well, Nora, feeling better now?" Leo asked. "A mother gives life to a child, and she can also take it away," Leo said. "I don't understand what you're talking about," she replied, turning to face him sideways. "You're hiding something, I see it in your eyes. Are you ashamed?" The old man asked. "Well, may God be your judge," he said, turned around, and left. All three of them remained in complete silence. Nora continued to stare at the table. After the old man's words, she was afraid to look at her husband's eyes. "Mom, do you know something?" Melibeo asked. Valerio was looking at her too. "Me?" she said, shifting her gaze from one to the other. "No more than you do. In my opinion, this old man has gone crazy," she said, and then, citing a headache, she went to her room. "Dad, don't you find it strange that the bride disappears right before the wedding?" Melibeo asked. "Strange or not, we need to find a person," Valerio said. Meanwhile, Nora locked herself in the bathroom and dialed Antonio's number with trembling fingers. "Antonio, where's the girl?" she asked, expecting an immediate response. "In a safe place, just as you requested. I need you to keep her for a week, a month, or even a year." "I'll pay for it," she said, desperately hoping to keep this hidden. "The biggest reward for me is you, and you know that," a voice said on the other end of the line. Nora curled her lips. "You won't start blackmailing me, will you?" she asked cautiously. "Why would I? I'll just always be waiting for your return, if, of course, that matters to you." "Sorry, I need to go to Josefa now," he said and hung up. Nora stared at herself in the mirror. Her reflection looked gray and gloomy. Her eyes, moist from welled-up tears, were glistening. Turning on the water, she tried to calm herself. "Nora." Nora flinched. Her husband knocked on the bathroom door. "Darling, are you here?" Valerio awaited a response. After composing herself, the woman appeared in the room. "Is everything all right?" Valerio inquired. "Well, how can I put it? I'm upset," she said. "Really? And why is that?" Valerio asked. "Isn't this what you wanted?" he added, although Valerio knew nothing about the girl's kidnapping. Nora tensed. "What do you mean?" she asked. Valerio approached her and pulled her closer. Nora couldn't look him in the eyes. She felt like Valerio would instantly figure everything out. "Are you pushing me away?" Valerio asked, noticing his wife avoiding eye contact. "You haven't been yourself all day," he said. "I'm just wondering if we did the right thing. But still, it will be better this way, I'm sure," Nora said, turning her head to the right. "What's this?" Valerio asked. "What do you mean?" "Some sort of mark with small red dots on your neck," her husband said. Nora broke out in a cold sweat. She covered it with her hand. "You know, I went for a massage, and there was a new therapist. He left a bruise on me," Nora tried to explain. "A new therapist, I see," Valerio repeated. Nora silently prayed that her husband would believe her. Then Valerio lifted her chin and looked straight into her eyes. Nora struggled to maintain her gaze. She was afraid Valerio would read everything through her eyes. Just a moment more, and his lips pressed tightly against hers. "I need to leave for a couple of days. Unfortunately, I can't stay," Valerio said. "Keep me updated on things," he concluded, putting on his jacket and leaving the room. Nora watched him through the window. At some point, Valerio looked up, and Nora flinched. She didn't want him to see that she was watching him through the window. When Valerio's car left the premises, Nora breathed a sigh of relief. She walked over to the bed and flopped onto her back. There, she felt an exhausting restlessness. Meanwhile, Leo had arrived at the police station. He reported his granddaughter's disappearance. A young police officer in uniform lazily approached his desk and invited the old man to sit on a chair. "Tell me, she disappeared today?" he asked, taking a ballpoint pen and twirling it between his fingers. "Yes, out of nowhere. The thing is, she wasn't planning to go anywhere. She's getting married in 2 days with her fiancé," Leo said, never taking his eyes off the police officer. "But she's the bride. All girls get nervous before the wedding," the young police officer said. "Just wait, she'll come back. Maybe she went to a friend's place or somewhere else," he continued. "So, Leo, you should go home," the police officer concluded. He then handed Leo his phone number and said that if the girl doesn't return within 3 days, they will start searching for her. 3 days. In 3 days, anything can happen to a person, the old man grumbled. But what could he do? Leo stood up and left the office. Upon returning home, he met Josefa's friend, Christina. The girl in a cream-colored dress was waiting for him by the gate. "Where did our Josefa go?" she asked, swatting away a persistent fly. Christina hadn't been able to reach her since the morning. "Josefa disappeared," the old man replied, as if she vanished into thin air. "I don't understand, Leo," Christina said. "You mean disappeared? Did she have a fight with Malibio?" she asked. "That's the thing, everything is fine between them. Today, I went to the city and then to Malibio's parents, and she's not there either. Malibio was the one who told me that Josefa disappeared. Her phone is off. I waited for a while, then went to the police. And just now, I got back home. And Josefa is still missing," the old man explained, unlocking the door. "What should we do now?" Christina asked, sitting down on a chair. She put her hand to her lips, shifting her gaze from one object to another, as if she wanted to find a clue among them. "Wait, what else can we do?" "Maybe she'll come back on her own," Leo said. Nora lay on the bed, spreading her arms out to the sides. In a matter of days, she had turned her life upside down. Remembering Antonio's tender kiss, she traced her lips with her fingertips. There was a knock on the door. The woman flinched. Malibio appeared at the door. "Ah, son, it's you," she said, composing herself. "Mom, I wanted to ask you something," Malibio said, taking a couple of steps towards her. "I'm listening," Nora replied, shifting to the couch. Nora turned towards Malibio so that he wouldn't see the mark left from her encounter with Antonio. "Mom, tell me the truth. Did you say anything to Josefa that could make her disappear?" Malibio asked, approaching her vanity table, where she usually applied makeup. "No, honey, no, why would I do that?" Nora replied, feigning confusion. "Yes, I admit that your father treated you cruelly, depriving you of money. But it's all for your own good. You'll thank me later, she said. Melibeo was standing with his back to her, looking at various cosmetics on the table. Then his gaze fell on a piece of paper with the same texture on which a letter from his father was written. He carefully slid the paper towards him, revealing another sheet underneath, on which something was written in his mother's handwriting. At that moment, Nora massaged her temples. She wanted her son to see how much she was suffering. I got you, Mom, sorry. Melibeo approached her. I love you, he said, then quickly left her room. Melibeo entered his own room and swiftly unfolded the paper with her writing. There was everything he had read in his father's letter. Now he knew that his mother had made up all of this and that she had merely influenced his father. The door creaked and Melibeo crumpled the paper and turned around. It was the spaniel. With a melancholic look, it approached him and leaned against his leg. Melibeo crouched down and patted its neck. Then he gathered some belongings and left the house, heading to a friend's place where he planned to stay temporarily. Living in Josefa's house didn't quite sit right with him. Besides, there wasn't much space there since she takes clients home. Without saying anything to his mother, Melibeo got into a taxi and left the house. Nora went downstairs, called her son. Realizing she was home alone, she dialed Antonio's number again. The phone was still unavailable. Damn it! Maybe it's for the best, she said to herself. What if something happens to the girl? A bright thought flashed in her mind. It's not my concern anymore, she reassured herself. Would you like to relax a bit? A man asked, pouring himself a drink. Approaching the girl, Antonio offered her a drink. She declined. What's your name? Josefa? He asked after moistening his throat with a cold drink. The girl nodded. I don't understand your behavior, the girl said, looking around. It was evident that professionals had chosen the interior. I wouldn't want to stay here for long, Josefa said. Let's quickly measure for your curtains, calculate the amount of fabric needed, and I'll go home. All right, go ahead, Antonio casually replied, leaving the girl alone. He went upstairs and got busy with his tasks. Josefa started working. She hoped that since Nora had recommended her to Antonio as a seamstress, maybe her attitude towards her had changed. The girl had no idea that she was here for an entirely different reason. It's all done, Josefa said, once she had finished measuring everything. She had done it all on her own. After sketching a few curtain design options, she waited for Antonio to return to the living room. But when no one answered, she called the homeowner once more. The silence made her uneasy. In such a large house, she felt uncomfortable. Antonio's house resembled a dragon's lair. Stone alternated with wood, and wood with stone, and the sunlight barely penetrated through the closed blinds. Searching for the homeowner, Josefa made her way upstairs. Different interior items captivated Josefa as if she had stepped into another world that beckoned her with its uniqueness. The girl's attention was drawn to a figurine carved from pure wood. It was a dragon. Every scale, every horn were crafted with special precision. When she looked at the dragon's orange eyes, she had shivers all over her spine. Standing just slightly taller than her, he looked confidently straight ahead, devoid of any trace of pity. The girl felt an urge to touch him. She reached out her hand to touch one of the sharp teeth. They looked so real. Be careful, you might hurt yourself, a voice said from behind her. Josefa gasped. Finally, you're here, Josefa replied, turning back towards the dragon. Who made it? She inquired. I can't remember, some artist, Antonio shrugged. Josefa glanced at him in disbelief. The measurements are ready. Here, take a look, whether you like these curtain options or not, Josefa said, extending a notebook with sketches towards him. Oh, you draw quite well, he noted. No one has ever sketched my house with a pencil on a notebook page. Josefa smiled, thanking him. I'll call a taxi. Tell me the address, Josefa insisted, sensing that their conversation teetered on the edge of business and personal communication. As she reached for her phone to dial the number, she realized it was in her bag in the hall. "Why do you need a taxi?" "I'll take you," Antonio said. But a bit later, "I'd like to talk with you a bit longer." Josefa was taken aback. "I'd be happy to talk with you, but I have a wedding in 2 days, so I'd like to get home as soon as possible," Josefa said, and it was the truth. "I know, Nora told me," Antonio said, leaning his arm against the wall in such a way that Josefa found herself trapped between the dragon and the man. "Are you and Nora lovers?" she asked, wanting to catch him off guard with the question. But the man didn't falter and calmly replied, "Perhaps." It seemed that Antonio enjoyed playing these kinds of games. Not wanting to be part of this any longer, Josefa quickly struck Antonio between the legs and then pushed him away. She dashed down the stairs towards the exit. However, when she pushed the front door, it turned out to be locked. She tried turning the doorknob to unlock it, but it wouldn't budge. Apparently, it was locked with a key, which was nowhere nearby. Josefa rushed to the nearest table in search of the key, but there was nothing there. Antonio appeared on the second floor. Despite the pain, he was already coming downstairs. However, he wasn't in a hurry at all. In fact, he relished watching the girl desperately try to find the key. When he was just a few steps away and the key was still not found, Josefa lunged further into the house. She didn't know where to hide, but upon entering the nearest room, she locked herself inside. Her heart was beating wildly, she was shaking and thoroughly agitated. A knock on the door made her jump, and Antonio's voice sounded. "Josefa, I'm sorry, that was a bad joke," he said. "I demand my belongings and my phone with the address of your house," the girl said with a serious tone. "Josefa, understand, I can't do that." "I promised someone that you'd stay here for a while," Antonio replied. He believed he could quickly persuade the girl to his side. "So, what's the deal here? Bring my phone here immediately, or else I'll have to make a big mess in your house," Josefa said, and she wasn't joking. "Don't worry, the cleaner comes to clean the house regularly, so you don't have to fret." "But I can't let you go, I keep my promises," Antonio said. There was silence for a while, and then Josefa heard footsteps receding and, a moment later, the sound of a closing door. She realized he had left. She pulled back the latch, but the door was now locked from the outside. "Oh no," Josefa said. "What nonsense is this?" She couldn't understand why she was being held here. And then it hit her. Just as Antonio had said, Nora ordered him to bring her here to prevent Malibio and her from marrying. The thought made her head spin. After sitting in silence for about an hour, Josefa needed to use the bathroom. In literal desperation, she began to inspect the room. Despite the closed blinds, the room was spacious and bright. There was a large, soft couch, a couple of armchairs, and a wide table. And then her gaze fell upon another door. Behind it was indeed a bathroom with a shower and a toilet. Afterwards, Josefa returned to the room and continued to explore. She approached the window, and it wasn't locked. She easily opened it. At that moment, she thought all her problems were solved. However, when she opened the window, she was surprised to find that it was at least 5 meters above the ground. What a paradox, she thought, but then remembered that she had climbed up a small staircase and had reached a door that led to this room. Inspecting in the room, she didn't find anything interesting. This room resembled a meeting room or a private office. There was nothing superfluous here. Tired of aimlessly wandering around, Josefa flopped onto the couch. The hot day had worn her out, and soon she fell asleep. Meanwhile, Nora was hurrying to meet Antonio. She still wanted to pay him a decent sum of money to make him stop tormenting her and stop arranging such meetings. Antonio had called her himself, and she wanted to seize the opportunity. A driver was taking her in his car. Nora was nervous. She was in a rush. She wanted to detach herself as quickly as possible. Suddenly, the car stopped. "What happened? Why aren't we moving?" she asked the driver, but he didn't hear her because he had already gotten out of the car. A moment later, the passenger door opened and the driver informed her that they had arrived. Then he extended his hand and Nora placed her hand on his palm. When she looked up, she saw her husband in front of her. "Valerio?" she said bewilderedly. "You were supposed to," she didn't finish her sentence. "How great that you're already home," she said, feigning joy at the meeting. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Antonio in the distance, walking towards the restaurant. "Surprised?" Valerio asked, placing his hand on his wife's back. He had to cancel his business trip due to certain circumstances. "The surprise worked, don't you agree?" Nora said, pondering the possible reason for her being there. "How about I escort you?" her husband offered, extending his hand to Nora. "Well," she chuckled, "there's nowhere to go now. My tailor just messaged me that his plans changed, and he won't be able to meet me today," Nora lied, waving her phone in front of Valerio's face. "What frivolity," Valerio joked. "Well then, maybe we could have lunch together, now that we're here," he suggested. With a radiant smile, Nora agreed. A husband and wife entered the restaurant. The hostess guided them to an available table. "Yes, this place is quite nice," Valerio remarked, settling onto a comfortable leather couch. Nora casted brief glances around in search of Antonio. He was sitting to the right of her and slightly behind Valerio. "Yes, I like this place too," she said, sweetly smiling. Just then, her phone rang. Seeing Antonio's name on the screen, she paled. Rejecting the call, she quickly stashed it in her purse. "Who's calling?" her husband inquired. "Oh, it's my sister. She wants me to help her choose a dress for her wedding," Nora lied. She felt ashamed that she had to lie. "Why don't you answer then?" her husband asked. At that moment, Nora glanced at Antonio, who was dialing her number again. For a couple of seconds, she held an anxious look on his face. "What's wrong with you?" her husband asked, turning around. But by that time, Antonio had already left his table. Nora sighed in relief. "I thought the tailor had arrived, but I was mistaken," Nora replied, starting her meal. The waiter had just brought out appetizing dishes. After lunch, Valerio and Nora briefly went to a place and then returned home. "Lately, we've been paying too little attention to each other," Valerio said, stroking Nora's hand. Valerio was right. Various tasks had distracted them from their family life. It seems that with someone you've been with for many years, you always assume they'll be there, and you can spend time with them anytime. In reality, though, those days keep getting postponed. "I'll give you a relaxing massage now," Valerio said, opening a drawer to retrieve Nora's favorite massager. "Oh, where did you get this?" Valerio asked, noticing a beautiful piece of jewelry there. "And didn't I tell you?" "I bought this for our son's wedding," Nora lied again. Antonio had given her this necklace. Hastily, before meeting him, she had taken it out of her purse and put it in the drawer. "I didn't know you ever liked color combinations like this," her husband said. He didn't show it, but he had doubts about Nora's fidelity. Lately, she seemed distracted, and according to the driver, she frequently went to the same place for meetings. Valerio lay down on the bed and began to gently massage his beloved's back. Her smooth and silky skin drove him wild. When her back turned pink, he tenderly kissed it. Valerio opened his eyes as the room dimmed. The sun was almost below the horizon. He turned his head and saw his wife sound asleep. Quietly, Valerio got up from the bed, planning to leave for his own room. The lit-up screen of Nora's phone made him pause. His eyes read the text on their own: "My queen loves to take risks." Valerio became intrigued, wondering who it could be from. He felt rage building up inside him. Unable to resist, he read all the messages from a user named Antonio. At first, he wanted to confront his wife immediately, but upon seeing the familiar name Josefa in the conversation, he decided to wait. Taking Nora's phone with him, he headed to meet his son. Valerio pulled up to Malibio's friend's house. His son greeted him, and they entered the house together. Valerio asked to speak alone. Then he told his son everything. "Melibio, don't do anything foolish, don't get heated. You might make things worse," his father said. Melibio paced back and forth, holding his head in his hands. "Right now, the most important thing is to ensure the girl is safe," his father advised. "Yes, you're right. How can we get her out of there?" Melibio wondered aloud. Only crude, straightforward methods came to mind. Night had fallen outside, and the cool breeze was refreshing. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to Antonio's house. The man was getting ready for the meeting. He put on his best suit and sprayed on his finest cologne. He was delighted that Nora had come to see him again. Antonio opened the door and was stunned. He was sure it was his beloved woman, so he didn't bother looking at the camera. However, there was Valerio standing in front of him. He broke into a sweat. In an attempt to pretend that everything was fine, Antonio feigned surprise, which quickly turned into a smile of joy at the meeting. "Long time no see. What a coincidence." Valerio cut him off mid-sentence with a powerful punch. With one blow, he knocked Antonio off his feet, sending him sprawling. Valerio entered the house, scanning his surroundings, followed by Melibio. "Where is she?" he asked, his eyes burning with anger. "Who exactly?" Antonio played the fool, then laughed. Melibio approached him and grabbed him by the collar, giving him a thorough shake. "If you've done anything to her, I'll crush you," Melibio growled. Valerio hurried to calm him down, while Antonio spat on the floor. "See how karma catches up with a person. Now both your wife and your fiancé are mine." He laughed. Spitefully. "Josefa!" Melibio shouted, then headed upstairs, checking every room. While the men were dealing with things downstairs, Josefa, unaware that someone had come for her, occupied herself. In a corner of the room, she noticed a sewing machine. In an attempt to calm herself, she started sewing. Fortunately, the place and conditions allowed it. There was also a small refrigerator in the room, akin to a minibar. Taking out some fruit and cookies from it, she had a snack and continued sewing. Time flew by as she worked, and she didn't realize it had already grown dark outside. A strange noise, absent before, made her take her foot off the pedal and listen. When she recognized Melibio's voice calling her, she began to knock and call his name in response. "It's better not to move," Valerio said, pointing a gun at Antonio. "Oh, someone wants to play," Antonio said, slowly getting to his feet. "I don't intend to have anything to do with you," Valerio replied. "We've come to take my son's bride. Everything else doesn't concern me," he said, trying to avoid escalating the conflict further. "Just like how you once took my bride away from me." Antonio yelled, and in the next second, he had a gun in his hand as well. "You know she made the choice herself. And yes, I love my wife, despite," Valerio fell silent. "Despite what? Come on, finish your sentence." "This time she chose me," Antonio taunted, trying to provoke Valerio into a bigger conflict. Meanwhile, Melibio found the room where Josefa was, but the door was locked. Melibio tried to force it open, but it wouldn't give way. Grabbing a small cabinet, he rushed up the narrow staircase and slammed into the door with all his might. Under the pressure, the door, with its lock shattered, swung open. "Melibio!" Josefa exclaimed happily. "I knew you'd find me." "I could feel it," she babbled, pressing herself against Melibio's chest. "My love, are you okay? Did he hurt you?" Melibio asked. "I'm okay, don't worry, everything's fine." "No one did anything to me," she reassured him, diving into his embrace. Melibio and Josefa descended the stairs. Melibio went first. In the corner of his eye, he noticed that his father, just like Antonio, was holding a firearm. Melibio was worried for his father. As Josefa peeked out, she gasped, quickly covering her mouth. "Stay here," Melibio whispered. Josefa pursed her lips, gripping Melibio's sleeve tightly. She didn't want to let him go. Since Antonio had his back to Melibio, it allowed him to come very close. "You must compensate for my emotional damage," Antonio said, implying that Nora didn't choose him. "Fine," Valerio replied, lowering his gun. "Shoot, I deserve it," he said. Antonio felt a taste of victory and impending satisfaction from revenge. He disengaged the safety on his gun, sweat formed on his forehead, another second passed, and a strike resounded, followed by a gunshot. Antonio collapsed to the ground. Melibio managed to disarm him by hitting him with a large statue. But when he turned to his father, he saw a red spot on his shoulder, which he covered with his hand. Melibio quickly called for an ambulance. The wedding ceremony started precisely at noon. Josefa looked stunning. Her wedding dress, crafted from her own design, caught eyes and aroused the desire to have something similar. Melibio admired his bride. He couldn't believe that, despite the difficulties, their wedding had finally taken place. "Son, are you upset with me for that letter?" his father asked when all the guests were gathered at the restaurant. "No, Dad, you had every right to do that," Melibio replied. It didn't matter to him how much money he had in his account when he had someone by his side for whom he wanted to perform real actions. "I knew you would handle it," his father said, patting him on the shoulder. Melibio turned and saw Leo. The old man winked at him. "It's good to take risks when you have kind people around you who can help at every moment," Melibio thought. Nora, who took that desperate step, certainly felt guilt and shame. But Josefa's sincere feelings and her husband's inner strength helped her remain human. After everything that happened, Nora and Valerio drifted apart. It was understandable, forgiveness takes time. After recovering, Antonio permanently erased Nora from his life. The newlyweds managed to open a sewing workshop. Josefa designed clothing models and created patterns herself, while Melibio handled advertising and sales, not forgetting the publication of a fashion magazine. Grandpa Leo continued to live in his old house. Now, with Josefa and Melibio moving into their own home, he finally got a chance to adopt a cat, something he couldn't do earlier due to his granddaughter's allergy. The townspeople's lives flowed on, and only the spaniel Giorgio wandered sadly through the house in search of a playmate.